Welcome back to your ultimate pit stop, Piston Pundit. This week, Canada's Parliament didn't just trade political barbs. It exposed a high-stakes battle over inflation, carbon pricing, tariffs, and the very future of Canada's auto sector. Prime Minister Mark Carney squared off against Pierre Poilievre over grocery bills and fuel costs, while Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly confronted renewed U.S. tariff threats from Donald Trump. But beneath the political theater lies something bigger: supply chains, battery plants, cross-border manufacturing, and the next generation of vehicles Canadians will build and drive. Parliament explodes, Carney versus Poilievre showdown. What began as a routine question period quickly evolved into a defining economic clash. Pierre Poilievre zeroed in on rising grocery prices and fuel costs, framing them as evidence that Carney's leadership is disconnected from everyday Canadians. His strategy was clear: tie inflation directly to government policy and channel rural frustration. Carney, however, reframed the argument. Instead of engaging in retail-level price outrage, he elevated the discussion to trade flows, export diversification, and agricultural market access. His counterpunch, that farmers benefiting from expanded export corridors tell a different story, shifted the tone from emotion to structure. At its core, this wasn't just politics. It was a debate about whether inflation is purely domestic mismanagement or a global phenomenon shaped by cross-border trade tensions and supply chain friction. But inflation doesn't operate in isolation. When fuel costs rise, the shock travels far beyond the pump, straight into manufacturing and logistics. Carbon clash, diesel costs rock supply chains. The most combustible exchange revolved around fuel: diesel, gasoline, and carbon pricing. Poilievre argued that fuel levies ripple through the entire economy. Higher diesel costs increase freight rates, which raise fertilizer transport expenses, which ultimately inflate grocery prices. For producers running tight margins, even minor increases per liter can cascade into meaningful cost pressure. Carney countered with policy nuance. Agricultural exemptions, relief measures, and targeted industrial carve-outs were highlighted as safeguards. He positioned biofuel incentives not as punitive taxes, but as strategic investments intended to stabilize farm incomes while aligning with global low-carbon trade standards. For the automotive sector, this debate has mechanical consequences. Diesel pricing influences trucking fleets that move engines, transmissions, battery modules, and semiconductors across the Ontario-Michigan corridor. Fuel policy directly impacts manufacturing economics. Before we go further, do us a favor and smash that like and subscribe button. It helps Piston Pundit reach more auto enthusiasts who care about the intersection of policy and pistons. Now, let's shift gears, because fuel costs are only part of the equation. External trade pressure may prove even more disruptive. Tariff crossfire, auto workers on the line. Mélanie Joly shifted the conversation outward, toward Washington. Renewed tariff threats from President Donald Trump have injected uncertainty into North America's manufacturing ecosystem. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has warned of inflationary consequences and destabilized cross-border trade, while recent U.S. Supreme Court rulings limiting presidential tariff authority have added legal complexity to the mix. For auto workers, this isn't abstract geopolitics, it's immediate risk. Canada's auto industry operates on deeply integrated supply chains. A single engine block can cross the border multiple times before final assembly. Add tariffs at any stage, and cost structures change overnight. Joly's message was clear. Job volatility in the auto sector is tied not just to domestic policy, but to external trade shocks that demand coordinated national response. But tariffs don't just threaten today's assembly lines. They also influence where tomorrow's electric vehicles will be built. EV Gamble, Canada's high-stakes battery pivot. Perhaps the most tangible issue discussed was electric vehicle manufacturing. Battery plants rising in Windsor and St. Thomas represent more than ribbon-cutting ceremonies. They are strategic anchors in North America's EV supply chain realignment. Canada is leveraging access to critical minerals like nickel, cobalt, and lithium to secure long-term manufacturing commitments. This marks a structural shift. For decades, Canada's auto strength centered on internal combustion assembly, precision-machined crankshafts, cylinder heads, and transmission housings. Now, high-voltage battery modules and power electronics define the future production landscape. Critics argue subsidies distort market forces. Supporters counter that global competitors, particularly the US, Europe, and China, are already deploying aggressive state-backed industrial strategies. The vehicles rolling off Canadian lines in 2030 will look very different from today's platforms. Yet electrification alone isn't enough. Where those vehicles are sold, and how exposed Canada remains to US trade volatility, may ultimately determine long-term stability. Global pivot. Carney's trade diversification bet. Beyond the heated exchanges in Parliament, Mark Carney has been working the international circuit with a clear objective: reduce Canada's reliance on a single trading partner. His Indo-Pacific trade mission targeting India, Australia, and Japan signals a calculated shift toward broader export resilience. The strategy is simple in theory, but complex in execution. Dilute exposure to US tariff volatility by cultivating alternative markets. For the automotive sector, this matters deeply. If Canadian-built vehicles, powertrain components, or EV battery modules gain stronger footholds abroad, manufacturers gain flexibility. Diversified export lanes reduce political risk premiums and improve long-term capital planning. But trade diversification also sends signals beyond autos. Financial markets and other industries are responding in real time. Trade shockwaves, markets, aerospace, and auto risk. Trade friction is no longer confined to automobiles. Aerospace, agriculture, and advanced manufacturing are increasingly drawn into the same tariff orbit. Canada's certification of certain aircraft amid US trade pressure demonstrates how deeply interconnected these sectors have become. Markets are watching closely. The TSX rally following legal constraints on US tariff authority illustrates how sensitive investors are to trade predictability. For automakers, this isn't abstract finance, it's capital expenditure reality. Assembly plants, engine machining facilities, and battery gigafactories require multi-billion-dollar commitments. If policy uncertainty drives up borrowing costs, projects slow down or migrate elsewhere. And this is where the debate ultimately becomes philosophical, because strategy and affordability are pulling in opposite directions. Policy divide: short-term relief versus long game. The deeper divide revealed in Parliament wasn't just about carbon pricing or fuel levies, it was philosophical. The opposition framed economic strain in personal, near-term terms: grocery bills, diesel costs, and household budgets. The government responded with institutional tools: trade agreements, industrial subsidies, export corridors, and electrification strategy. In the automotive context, that distinction becomes pivotal. Short-term affordability affects dealership traffic today. Structural industrial planning determines whether Canada builds next-generation EV platforms tomorrow. And that brings us to the ultimate question: where does Canada go from here? Final verdict: Canada's auto industry crossroads. After dissecting the exchanges, one reality stands out. This wasn't a narrow policy quarrel, it was an industrial crossroads moment. From Windsor's battery facilities to cross-border engine supply chains, the architecture of Canada's auto sector is being reshaped by geopolitics, electrification, and trade law simultaneously. Carney's camp is wagering on diversification, EV investment, and long-term supply chain resilience. The opposition is emphasizing affordability, lower fuel burdens, and immediate economic relief. Both visions tap into legitimate concerns. So now we want to hear from you. Do you think Canada can secure its EV manufacturing future without overextending subsidies? Are tariff tensions with the US a temporary storm or a structural shift? And how should fuel and carbon policy balance affordability with industrial competitiveness? Drop your thoughts below. If you value deep automotive analysis that connects policy to pistons, make sure to subscribe to Piston Pundit and hit that notification bell for upcoming vehicle updates. Thank you for being part of this community, and we'll see you at the next pit stop. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen. There's plenty more to explore.